He was just a quiet janitor, invisible to everyone in the grand mansion. She was a powerful woman, used to silence and control. But one night, a single unexpected moment shattered everything they both believed about the world, and about each other. What started as a simple accident would change two lives forever. Watch until the end to uncover a story of quiet strength, unspoken kindness, and a choice that could light the darkest of rooms. Subscribe for more powerful stories. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? The Weston estate, tucked behind towering wrought iron gates and surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges, stood as a monument to order, wealth, and calculated silence. Within its vast halls, marble floors gleamed under the glint of antique chandeliers, while the faint hum of climate control whispered through the vents like a ghost no one acknowledged. Paintings in heavy gold frames hung immaculately on cream-colored walls, and vases of white orchids were replaced every third day without fail. Nothing was out of place. Nothing dared to be. Its owner, Eleanor Weston, was a woman of formidable presence and unshakable solitude. In her mid-60s, she wore tailored silk-like armor, her salt and pepper hair always pulled back in a neat chignon. Since the death of her husband, she had hosted no guests, attended no parties, and declined every invitation with polite detachment. The estate functioned with mechanical precision, maintained by a staff trained to operate without friction or voice. Eleanor spoke little, smiled less, and expected perfection without acknowledgement. Among the staff was a young man named Jaden. He had been working as a cleaner in the estate for almost 3 years. Hired through an agency, his file described him as punctual, discreet, and disciplined. Eleanor barely noticed him. He was simply part of the machinery of her life, one of many silent figures that ensured her world remained undisturbed. He swept, dusted, polished, and disappeared. She never asked about his past, never wondered what he did beyond his shifts. He was, like everything else in her house, useful and silent. It was well past 2 a.m. when Eleanor awoke with an unusual dryness in her mouth. Sleep had evaded her lately. Too many thoughts, too many memories she refused to unpack. Slipping into her robe, she moved through the darkened corridor toward the kitchen, barefoot and quiet, out of long habit. The estate was always hushed at this hour, its grand rooms like sleeping beasts. But as she reached the lower level, a thin sliver of light seeped from under the kitchen door. Eleanor paused. That was odd. Staff retired by 10. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, should have been swallowed by night. With a frown, she pressed her hand to the doorknob and turned it silently. She stepped in and froze. At the far end of the room, seated at the marble island under the glow of a harsh overhead light, was Jaden. His uniform shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled past his elbows. An oversized gray hoodie hung loosely over his frame. He hadn't noticed her. He was bent over a notebook, pencil behind his ear, brow furrowed in concentration. Textbooks lay open around him, thick ones with medical terms, anatomical diagrams, chemical equations. A cup of tea steamed quietly beside him, forgotten. For a moment, Eleanor simply stood there, unsure what she was seeing. The image was so out of context, so foreign to the rhythm of her house, that she questioned whether she was still dreaming. Jaden, her cleaner, was studying medicine. She cleared her throat. He jumped, knocking over the pencil and nearly toppling his tea. His eyes, wide and startled, met hers. There was panic in them. Not guilt, but fear. I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, scrambling to his feet. "I didn't think anyone was awake. I was just—" "It's fine," she interrupted, her voice calm but firm. I was coming for water. He nodded too quickly, already gathering his books. I'll leave right away. You don't need to. He paused, confused. She stepped past him toward the refrigerator and filled a crystal glass from the chilled dispenser. Her eyes lingered on the open textbook. What are you working on? He hesitated. An entrance exam, he said quietly, for an online pre-med program. She turned slightly to face him. You study here? He shifted awkwardly. Only after hours. I finish work first. I can't afford regular classes, but if I pass this, I might get a scholarship. Eleanor looked back at the books. They were second-hand. Worn spines, notes scrawled in the margins, diagrams traced in colored ink. Nothing about them was decorative. They had been studied. You want to be a doctor? She asked. His eyes met hers again. There was no defiance in them, only a quiet fire. Yes, he said. Then, setting her glass down, she turned to leave. Don't let me disturb you, and she walked out. But in the hallway, she stopped. The light still glowed beneath the door, steady and soft. For the first time in years, Eleanor Weston felt the faintest tremor in the carefully constructed stillness of her world. It wasn't discomfort. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. Back in her bedroom, she did not return to sleep. Instead, she stood at the window, watching the dark outlines of the trees sway in the breeze. The estate was as still as always. The silence she had long considered her ally now felt like something different, heavier, less certain. The next morning, she called for Mr. Hammond, the estate's house manager, and asked, as though in passing, "How long has Jaden been with us?" "Almost 3 years, ma'am," Hammond replied. "Hired through Lockridge Staffing. Came highly recommended. Never missed a day. Keeps to himself. Sends money home, I believe. To Georgia. Family situation." She nodded once, her expression unreadable. "Has he ever requested anything?" "No, ma'am. He's very private. Never caused trouble." Eleanor said nothing more, but for the rest of the day she caught herself watching him as he polished the hallway banisters, as he vacuumed the study in his careful, unobtrusive way. He never paused, never lingered. But now she saw the fine details, how his eyes flicked towards the shelves of books when he passed them, how his fingers moved with unconscious discipline, how, even in silence, there was thought. That night, at precisely 2:15, she found herself again at the top of the stairs. She hesitated. The light under the kitchen door was there again. She did not open the door this time. Instead, she stood in the shadowed hallway and listened. The soft scratch of pencil on paper, the gentle rustle of pages, and then, faintly, his voice. He was whispering medical terms under his breath, practicing pronunciations. Eleanor Weston stood alone in the dark and listened to a dream unfolding in borrowed hours. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't in years. She had been wrong. The house wasn't silent. It had simply been waiting to be heard. And now, for the first time, someone had dared to speak. Eleanor Weston sat alone in her study, a steaming cup of untouched tea on the mahogany table beside her. Outside the towering windows, the morning sun sliced through the last remnants of fog, casting golden stripes across the Persian rug. But the usual serenity of the room had grown brittle, as though the light now exposed something she had previously ignored. Her mind circled the same image again and again. Jaden, hunched over his books at the kitchen island, whispering anatomical terms into the silence. He hadn't seen her watching the next night. He hadn't even known she stood just beyond the doorway, listening. But that moment had carved a crack in the marble of her world, one that hadn't closed since. By mid-morning, she summoned Hammond again. Her voice, though as composed as ever, carried a thread of tension. "Hammond," she began, "this young man, Jaden, you mentioned his family is in Georgia?" "Yes, ma'am," Hammond replied, adjusting his tie with a practiced hand. "I believe he supports his mother and 2 younger siblings. Never speaks of them, but he's consistent in sending money home. Weekly transfers." She nodded slowly. "And his employment here, has it ever been in question?" "Not once. He's among the most reliable on staff. Works late, never complains. He's the kind you hardly notice, but the house runs smoother when he's here." That last line lingered after Hammond left. Hardly notice. It was meant as praise, but it pierced deeper than intended. Eleanor stood by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the curtain. She realized with a twinge of guilt that she had lived surrounded by people she never truly saw. And Jaden, so young, so invisible, had dreams bigger than anything her world was built to support. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in her dimly lit study, the light of her laptop screen painting her face in cold blue. It didn't take long to find the program, an online pre-med track through a reputable state university. The entrance exam was required for admission. The tuition, while modest by her standards, would be prohibitive for someone earning what he did. There were no formal scholarships listed, just deadlines, requirements, payment plans. She scrolled through them all, reading everything twice, as if understanding the logistics could justify what she already knew she would do. When the email to her lawyer was sent, the sky had already begun to pale with morning. She stared at the message for several long minutes before closing the screen. The request was simple: establish a scholarship fund under an anonymous name. Fund tuition, supplies, and include a stipend. Modest, but enough to cover basic expenses. Keep it clean, untraceable. Ensure the university handled communication. The lawyer didn't question the request. Eleanor had always been decisive. Her wealth gave her that luxury. For the next 2 days, she didn't mention it. She returned to routine. Her steps echoed through the polished halls. Her meetings were kept, her signature placed on invoices and donations. But in quiet moments, in the hush before dinner, or as she passed the staff corridor, she found herself listening for the familiar sounds of paper rustling, the low murmur of words repeated under breath. She saw him again late one evening. He was crouched beside the laundry room, his textbook spread across his knees. A pen moved steadily in his hand. He didn't notice her approach until she cleared her throat softly. Jaden looked up, startled. His cheeks flushed, and he began gathering his materials. "I'm sorry, I wasn't—" "It's all right," she said, more gently than she intended. "You're not in trouble." He nodded, uncertain, then paused. Something about the way she stood, the hesitation in her usually firm voice, made him stop retreating. "May I ask," she said carefully, "what drives you?" He blinked. "Ma'am?" "To study like this, at night, in secret." She folded her arms, more to steady herself than out of sternness. Jaden hesitated, then looked down at his hands. "When I was 10, he said quietly, "my dad collapsed in our living room. No one knew what to do. We didn't have a doctor nearby, couldn't afford the hospital. I sat next to him for hours. He kept apologizing to me, like it was his fault." Eleanor remained silent. His voice was steady, but the pain beneath it was clear. "I promised I'd never feel that helpless again," he added. Still, she said nothing, but in his voice, in that confession, she heard an echo of herself, years ago, standing beside her husband's hospital bed, too late to change anything. She had missed the signs. She had assumed he was fine, that he'd recover. She had believed the comfort of wealth would shield them from tragedy. It hadn't. She turned and left without a word, but something inside her shifted. Later that night, she reviewed the documents her lawyer had sent. The framework was clean, legal. The money would move through a third-party donor initiative affiliated with the university. No one would trace it to her. All it needed now was a name. Without thinking, she typed it in. The Daniel Weston Scholarship Fund. Her husband's name. He had always believed in helping quietly, without spectacle. She signed the papers and sent them off. 4 days later, the university sent the acceptance letter. It arrived in a standard envelope tucked into the stack of mail Eleanor received every morning. She handed it off to Hammond without a word, who placed it discreetly in the staff mailroom. That evening, she passed the corridor again. Jaden's room was quiet, door closed, no sounds, but the next morning, something had changed. His steps were slower, his shoulders hunched, his face drawn. He still did his work, still moved through the house with precision, but something in him had dimmed. That afternoon, Eleanor found herself in the greenhouse, surrounded by orchids and creeping vines. She sat on the iron bench alone, uncertain for the first time in a long time. She had done what she could, offered the path, opened the door, but she hadn't expected how heavy it would feel, waiting to see if he would walk through it. Back in the house, Jaden stared at the letter for the third time. It was real. He had been accepted. Tuition covered, materials included, a small monthly stipend. But it wasn't that simple. His mother still needed medication. Rent for their apartment in Georgia was still due every month. His siblings still needed school clothes and lunch money. If he accepted, even as an online student, he'd have to reduce his work hours. And that meant the family would suffer. The dream was within reach, but so was the weight. He folded the letter and slid it beneath his mattress. That night, Eleanor stood by the window in her study. The house behind her was still, but her chest ached with the pressure of helplessness. She had given him the opportunity. Now she had to wait, not as a benefactor, not as an employer, but as a human being, hoping he would choose himself, hoping he would believe he was worth it. The morning after the letter arrived, Jaden stood at the threshold of Eleanor Weston's study, a manila envelope held tightly in his hands. His knuckles were white from the grip, and his face was carefully composed, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the storm beneath. He had never come to her directly before. Not like this. When Eleanor looked up from her desk and saw him there, she knew. She didn't need to ask what brought him. She gestured toward the armchairs by the tall bay windows. Light poured through the glass in pale streaks, softening the rich hues of the room. He stepped in slowly, hesitating before taking a seat on the edge of the cushion, the envelope still clutched to his chest. "I received the letter," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "From the university." Eleanor nodded. "I'm glad." He opened his mouth, paused, then met her gaze. "There's a scholarship," he continued. "Full tuition, monthly stipend, anonymous donor." "Yes," she said after a moment, her voice just as even. "There is." He exhaled, not with relief, but with uncertainty. "Was it you?" The question hung in the room like the hush before a storm. She considered dodging it, she considered lying, but the look in his eyes demanded more. Not answers, but honesty. "Yes," she said, "it was me." Jaden looked away, his fingers finally loosening around the envelope. For a long time he didn't speak. Then, "I'm grateful," Truly, but I don't think I can accept it." Eleanor blinked. "Why not?" His eyes flicked back to hers, heavy with quiet burden. "Because it's not just about me," he said. "If I take this, if I shift my hours or leave this job, even part-time, my family will lose everything. Rent won't get paid. My mom's prescriptions won't be filled. My little brother, he still has a year of high school. They depend on me." "But the program is online," she said. "You don't have to leave entirely." "I'd still need time," he replied. "To study, to focus, to take the labs and exams. Even if I stayed on in some capacity, I couldn't send home what I do now. It's not enough. It was never enough." She rose from her seat and began to pace, slowly. Her heels tapped against the hardwood like a metronome of frustration. She had built her entire life solving problems. But this was different. This wasn't a transaction or a contract. It was a choice embedded in years of sacrifice. "What you call selfishness," she said finally, turning to face him, "I would call courage." He shook his head. "It doesn't feel like that." "You've spent your life giving," she said, "to them, to this job, to a system that's never given anything back. If you give up your dream now, you'll keep surviving, but you'll never live." His expression didn't change, but his breath caught, almost imperceptibly. "I'm not asking you to abandon your family," she continued, voice gentler now, "but maybe it's time someone else helps carry the weight." Silence stretched again. He stared at the floor. She stared at him. Then, slowly, Jaden set the envelope down on the table between them. "I've never heard anyone say that to me before," he said. His voice was low. "Not once. I mean it." Another pause. Then he lowered his head and closed his eyes. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "You do," she said. "You've just never had permission to believe it." He looked up at her again. This time, something had changed. The fear was still there, but it was layered now, folded beneath something stronger. A spark. "I'll try," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I'll try." Eleanor nodded once. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't offer more words, but the look they shared was enough, an agreement, unspoken but real. That night, Jaden packed his things in quiet determination. He folded his uniforms and stacked his textbooks in a second-hand satchel. Then, in the soft light of his modest room, he wrote a letter to his family, explaining, promising, reassuring. He wasn't leaving them. He was building something for them, for all of them. He taped a photo of his siblings beside the small mirror above his desk. His mother, Mari, Ben. He whispered a promise into the still air and tucked the envelope into his coat pocket. The following day, the estate felt different. It wasn't in the walls or the light, it was in the rhythm. The staff noticed his absence first in small ways. The laundry carts weren't restocked with the same precision. The hallway vases weren't dusted by noon. The third-floor piano, which he always polished last, held fingerprints. Eleanor noticed it too. That evening, she walked into the kitchen. The stool by the island was empty. She made herself tea, placed a second cup beside it, out of habit, or perhaps something deeper, and left it untouched. The point of no return had passed. Nothing in the house had changed. And yet, inside her, everything had. For most of her life, Eleanor Weston had been defined by what she possessed: estates, art, legacy. But now, for the first time in years, she had given something without expecting anything in return. And it mattered. She checked the mailbox every day with a strange anticipation. She waited, not for thanks, not for recognition, but for some sign that the path she helped illuminate had not gone dark. One afternoon, a white envelope arrived. No return address, just her name in slanted handwriting. She opened it in her study, alone. "I'm here. It's overwhelming. I feel like I've stepped into a world that doesn't know what to do with someone like me, but I'm still walking, still trying. Thank you for giving me the space to begin." There was no signature, just the letter. She read it twice. Then she stood, reached for a brass tack, and pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. The first of many, she hoped. Outside, the wind stirred the hydrangeas. The sun was beginning to set. Inside, Eleanor Weston smiled, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. The house, still as ever, now breathed with a different kind of silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something growing. Jaden adjusted the strap of his worn satchel as he stepped through the gates of the university's campus. The air was different here, sharper, charged with the quiet electricity of people moving forward. He had arrived, not in some abstract future tense, not in the realm of maybe or someday. This was now. The orientation had been overwhelming. Students his age and younger swarmed the halls with an ease he didn't recognize. They carried expensive laptops, traded stories about prep schools, shared knowing glances about professors whose names meant nothing to him. Jaden said little. He kept his head down, his pen always moving. What he lacked in context, he replaced with focus. Where others floated, he grounded himself. The apartment provided through the university's housing initiative was modest. A single room, a hot plate, second-hand furniture that creaked when touched. But it was his. The stipend from the scholarship, still listed as anonymous, covered the essentials: rent, food, transit. The tutoring work he picked up in the evenings sent a small but crucial trickle back home to Georgia, enough to keep his siblings in school, enough to buy his mother's medication. Jaden built a routine with military precision. Up at 6, lecture at 8, lab at 10, reading by noon, notes until dinner, tutoring from 7 to 9, study again until sleep overtook him. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was movement. Every page turned was a step forward. The days blurred into each other, and so did the nights. He rarely spoke unless asked to. In group work, he took on more than his share to avoid dragging anyone down. His notes were color-coded. His flashcards covered entire walls of his apartment. Some of his classmates joked that he was trying to memorize the whole field of medicine. They didn't know how close they were to the truth. Still, doubt followed him like a shadow. He felt it in the echo of unfamiliar medical terms, in the polished voices of his peers, in the weight of how much was riding on him not failing. It was during his second month that something shifted. In a lecture on immunology, the professor presented a complex case study, deliberately vague symptoms, conflicting data. The room fell silent. Students flipped through notes, brows furrowed. Jaden raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Jaden," he said. "Jaden Cole. I think it could be Jobs syndrome. Hyper-IgE, autosomal dominant. The presentation fits with what we read last week in the supplemental study packet. The eczema, the facial features, the abscesses." The professor blinked. "Correct. Very well done." Heads turned, not in judgment, but curiosity. From that day forward, things changed. His classmates began to include him in conversations, asked for his notes, invited him to study groups. Professors remembered his name. Jaden remained quiet, but no longer invisible. Still, he didn't forget where he had come from. He never allowed comfort to replace discipline. At night, he lit the corner lamp by his desk, pulled out his books, and studied until the lines blurred. On weekends, he worked double tutoring hours to ensure his family had what they needed. And once a month, he wrote a letter. Not to his family, they spoke often, but to the anonymous donor he had long since figured out was Eleanor Weston. He never signed his name, never addressed her directly, but his words were laced with a reverence reserved for someone who had handed him a key without asking for anything in return. He wrote about the lectures, about the lab equipment he still couldn't believe he had access to, about the long nights when he questioned everything, about the small wins, a correct diagnosis, a professor's nod, a new medical term memorized after 3 hours of repetition. Always at the bottom of the letter, he ended with the same line: "I haven't forgotten why I started." Back at the estate, Eleanor read every letter with quiet devotion. Her corkboard, once an afterthought in the corner of her study, had grown into a collage, neat rows of notebook paper pinned carefully across the wall, some faded, others still sharp with ink, each one a snapshot of a boy becoming something more. She never wrote back. She considered it once, even drafted a letter, but she never sent it. This was his journey. Her words would only complicate it. Instead, she showed her faith in quieter ways. Every few months, she increased the donation to the scholarship fund. A supplemental stipend appeared in his account. A new set of textbooks arrived before the next semester began. An upgraded laptop delivered with a typed note. For long nights and harder questions, Jaden never acknowledged the gifts directly, but in one letter he wrote, "Whoever you are, you keep reminding me that kindness is not weakness. That belief given freely might be the strongest medicine we have." She read that line aloud, her voice trembling at the end. Months passed. Jaden became more than a student. He became a presence. In class, he asked better questions. In labs, he led teams. He was chosen for a mentorship program pairing advanced students with international newcomers. Many of them were like him, first generation, unsure, afraid to speak too loudly. He guided them with the same quiet resolve he had once used to polish floors. In one letter, he wrote, "I didn't think I would have anything to offer, but maybe what I've carried can become a map for someone else." Eleanor read that sentence 3 times. Then she leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the winter garden below. The ivy was fading, but the hydrangeas had bloomed late that year. Even the house, once untouched by time, showed signs of change. The walls echoed differently now, not with silence, but with reverberations of something deeper. Purpose, growth, gratitude. Eleanor herself had changed, though she rarely admitted it. She no longer sought control in every inch of her world. She began speaking more softly, listening more intently. She supported a local health initiative in the city, volunteered once, discreetly, at a youth mentorship event, never under her name. But those who noticed her saw it. A lightness, a loosening. She didn't need credit. She only needed to know he was still walking. And every letter proved that he was. That spring, a package arrived. Inside was a photocopy of an award certificate, Outstanding Academic Excellence, College of Biomedical Sciences. It wasn't addressed to her, but she knew. The accompanying letter was briefer than most, but at the bottom he had written, "I almost didn't go, but now I can't imagine where I'd be if I hadn't." She framed the certificate, placed it beside the first letter. Each word, each page, each effort, like stones laid down to form a path. Jaden had once studied by a dim kitchen light, afraid, uncertain, hidden. Now he stood in lecture halls and walked unfamiliar campuses with quiet confidence. He was no longer surviving. He was living. and the boy, who once whispered medical terms into the dark, had become a man who could say, without apology, that he belonged. 4 years had passed since Jaden Cole last walked the gravel path leading to the Weston estate. The day was clear, the kind of spring sharpness that made the air feel like it had just been laundered. His shoes crunched lightly over the stones, and a breeze curled through the trees, stirring the ivy that now blanketed the outer walls of the mansion in a lush, deep green. The estate itself looked untouched by time. Pristine, symmetrical, quiet. But Jaden was not the same man who had once polished those marble floors in silence. He stepped out of the black sedan, adjusted the navy blazer over his crisp white shirt, and held a folder beneath his arm. It contained floor plans, permits, supply orders, and a dream that had taken him years to build. He stood still for a moment at the door, his fingers hovering over the brass bell. He pressed it gently, and the familiar chime rang out, a sound that once felt like a warning, now felt more like a memory. The door opened slowly. Eleanor Weston stood before him. She looked older, not dramatically, but in the subtle ways that time makes itself known. Her hair slightly thinner, her posture more delicate, the lines around her eyes deeper, but her presence was the same, grounded, composed, a woman used to the stillness of power. When her eyes found his, something in them softened. Her lips parted, but for a moment, no words came. Jaden smiled first. "Hello, Miss Weston." She shook her head, the beginnings of a laugh escaping her. "Not today." He lowered his gaze briefly, then looked back up. "Hello, Eleanor." She stepped aside, holding the door open without ceremony. "Come in." Jaden entered slowly. The marble under his feet shone as it always had. The scent of jasmine still floated faintly through the air, probably from the conservatory. The walls still bore the same artwork, and the chandelier above the foyer still refracted light like crystal rain. But it all felt different now, not because the house had changed, because he had. They walked through the halls in silence, familiar but no longer heavy. The kind of silence shared by people who have already said the most important things. In the winter garden, sunlight streamed through the glass walls, casting lacework shadows from the ferns across the tiled floor. Eleanor poured tea without asking how he took it. He accepted it with a nod. They sat quietly for several minutes before she broke the silence. "I kept all your letters." He looked up, surprised. "All of them?" "They're still on the wall," she said, her voice distant, almost reverent. "When the house gets too quiet, I read them again." He swallowed. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't even known if she still read them, let alone kept them. "I didn't expect you to." "You once wrote," she said softly, "that belief given freely is the strongest medicine." She looked at him. "I believe that now more than ever." He smiled gently, but there was weight in his eyes. "I never thanked you properly, for what you gave me, for what you did." "You don't owe me thanks," she said. "You did the work. You carried the weight. I just lit a path." "But without that light," he said, "I might have stopped walking." She nodded once, slowly. "And now?" "Now," he said, setting his tea down, "I'm ready for what comes next." She leaned back, giving him space to speak. "I've finished my rotations," he said. "My final exams are done. I've got interviews lined up for residencies in a few cities. Baltimore, Detroit, Queens." "Queens?" she asked, raising a brow. He smiled. "That's where the clinic is going to be. 5 rooms, 1 waiting bench. It won't be much, but it'll be ours." "Ours?" "For people who can't get seen anywhere else," he clarified. "I've already secured the space. I've got permits in progress and a retired general practitioner who's agreed to volunteer 2 days a week." "You'll need support," she said. I have it." Her eyes held his for a moment. Then the world just became a little better. He laughed softly, the sound light but true. "I'm not sure it's ready for me." "It will be," she said, "because you're ready for it." He stood after that, and she rose with him. The farewell wasn't final. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a handoff. As he stepped back onto the gravel path, he turned at the threshold. "I'm opening it next month, the clinic. It'll be called Humana." "A Latin root," she said, almost smiling. "For compassion." He nodded. "For humanity." Back in the city, the air was thicker, denser. Jaden moved through the streets that buzzed with honking taxis, distant music, and the smell of grilled meat from street vendors. Life didn't whisper here. It roared, but it welcomed him. The clinic was on a quiet block between an old laundromat and a shuttered bookstore. The building was squat and unremarkable, with bricks the color of dust and a roof patched more times than he could count. But inside, it had life. Fresh paint, clean chairs, sterile equipment that had taken months of donation letters and phone calls to gather. There was no brass plaque, no names carved into the wall. The people who mattered were not donors. They were patients. On opening day, no cameras arrived, no reporters, just a mother with 2 coffined children, a man with swollen knees, a teenager with a stitched lip and no insurance. Jaden welcomed them all. He asked for no money, only what they needed. The staff was small, 2 nurses from the neighborhood, a receptionist studying to be a social worker, and the old doctor who gave 2 days a week with tired hands and a sharp mind. Everything else, Jaden carried himself. Intake, diagnosis, treatment, follow-ups, cleaning, ordering supplies. Every day ended after midnight, and every morning began before sunrise. But he never stopped. He had built something real. And Eleanor's presence was there too. The rent was covered. An unexpected grant had arrived in the final month before opening. A second shipment of vaccines appeared early, prepaid. A shipment of new bandages came with a typed note. For what's next? Jaden never asked how. He didn't need to. One evening, long after sunset, he stepped outside and sat on the bench by the entrance. A mural had been painted on the wall by neighborhood children, stick figures holding hands under a blue sky, a tree whose leaves were made of real fingerprints. He leaned back against the painted bricks, tired but fulfilled. Footsteps approached. He looked up. Eleanor Weston stood before him. She wore a dark coat. Her hair, though still pinned neatly, had begun to loosen. Her shoes were scuffed slightly from the city pavement. He didn't rise. She didn't ask. Instead, she sat beside him. For a long time, they said nothing. The street hummed with traffic. Voices echoed down the block. A siren moaned far away, but on that bench, time narrowed. "I was nearby," she said finally. "I figured. I didn't want to come inside." "It's yours too," he said quietly. "You helped build it, whether you admit it or not." She didn't answer, but her hand reached across the bench. He took it. No ceremony, no performance, just warmth. "Some of the kids think the building is magical," he said. "Is it?" "In some ways." He didn't explain. She didn't ask. They stayed there for a long while, hands joined, the mural glowing behind them in the last amber rays of the day. They had never spoken of love, not in the way the world demanded. No declarations, no promises. But what existed between them was stronger than all of that, because it had never been said. It had only ever been lived. Later, as Eleanor stood to leave, she looked at him one more time. "Keep the light on," she said. He smiled. "I always do." The next morning, the clinic opened again. more patience, more stories. Jaden moved through each exam room not as someone proven he belonged, but as someone who knew he did. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a home. That evening, as he locked the door, he found a large envelope tucked behind the mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside, a single note. "You've made something beautiful. Thank you for showing me that kindness is never wasted." Jaden folded it carefully, placed it in his coat pocket, and later he tucked it between his medical books and his framed license. His quiet archive of becoming. And in his small office above a simple desk hung a single photo, faded, grainy. A young man hunched over a kitchen table, a pencil behind his ear, a textbook open beneath a dim yellow light. He had not known anyone was watching. Now he walked the world in light. He started with nothing but a dream, and now he's changing lives. If this story inspired you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from.